Welcome to the business end. Our guest today has had one of the most unusual careers in English rugby, not because of when it peaked, because of when it started, how long it lasted, and how much it was built in the hardest conditions. The sporting pedigree was there. His father was a professional squash player, Britain's #1 and ranked 9th in the world, and his great-grandfather played for the Springboks. But Nick Easter's own route was anything but fast-tracked. University, a job in London, club rugby with Rosslyn Park. He didn't turn professional until his 20s, and he didn't win his first England cap until he was 28. From there, 54 caps, World Cup final in 2007, and the 2011 Six Nations, where he lifted the trophy as England captain, the first silverware since 2003 World Cup. Then a leaked report, a line taken out of context, and more than 3 years in international exile. Most careers end there. His didn't. He came back at 36 to become England's oldest ever try scorer, signed off with a World Cup hat-trick at 37, of the match in his final test. At club level, he was Harlequins to the core, 12 seasons, 181 appearances, more than any player in the club's professional era. A relegation, a promotion, and the club's first Premiership title in 2012. And the coaching career has been just as eventful. The Currie Cup with the Sharks, the collapse of Worcester Warriors happening around him, and then a rebuild at part-time Chinner. Bottom half of National 1 when he walked in, champions and promoted 18 months later. All the while coaching with the USA Eagles on the road to the 2027 World Cup. Reputation, resilience, builds, nobody has lived all three quite like this. Nick, it's fantastic to have you join us.
Thank you very much, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, hi Nick. Thank you for joining us. So let's before we go into the pressure moments, I just want to talk about your career and how you started off, because it's not, a traditional kind of footpath for a professional player nowadays. So basically you're at Rosslyn Park, working in London, and then all of a sudden you go to Orwell, you get offered a professional contract. What keeps the dream alive, when you're seeing perhaps a game going past you, the professional game?
Good question. And I suppose rugby only went professional, I think, the year I left school. So we're talking about rugby, 96, 97 was the first year it was professional. That was my first year at university. So it wasn't, I know I don't know whether you did, but we had a careers officer, that was there for like half an hour, maybe twice a year. What do you want to do? And no one knows what they want to do. I mean, they probably still don't know what they want to do and they get in their 40s, right? But it wasn't an option. I do actually remember saying, and by the way, I'm no good at it. I remember saying once that I want to be a professional golfer, like that. And he sort of looked at me and went, do you know how much practice needs to go? And I went, yeah, it's probably not going to happen, is it? But my point being is I love sport. I absolutely love sport, sporting family. You mentioned my dad and my granddad, but also my aunt was a professional golfer over in the States and still lives out there as well. But it runs in the family. So I love my sport. Every time the rugby season came around, for me, it was just encapsulated a little bit more than the other sports, probably because of the physical nature of it. But it had the spatial awareness, it had the skill, it had the team element. I love being part of a team. I think also the fact there was never any big exams in the winter term compared to the summer term, A-levels and GCSEs and everything was also quite important from an enjoyable factor. But yeah, so I went to university, and to be honest, but by then, from a sports point of view, cricket and rugby were the two that I played the most of. If you're talking sort of on a serious-ish note, where you might make sacrifices to make sure that you were punctual, you were turning up for training and stuff. And the rugby at uni was 2 terms, the cricket was probably 3 months, and that was the decision made, really. But still, when I was at university, I played for the university. Played a bit of club rugby, did actually play a few games for Nottingham in my second year, who were in National 1, I can't remember. Played a few games for Harrogate, who were in a similar league as well, but just a handful sort of the year after. And then it was sort of, right, well, I got my degree, where do I want to go with it? My degree was in maths. I did maths because I was good at adding up. I could always tell the referee the score. We happened to always be winning as well. And I hadn't had a gap year, so I went out to South Africa. And I taught out there. I taught maths and sport out there at Rondebosch School in Cape Town, in Newlands, And, I love my sport. Well, South Africans really do like their sport. And in this sort of suburb of Cape Town, you had four very, very big rival schools: Bishop's, Weinberg, Saxe, Rondebosch, and then you had the rugby schools, sort of Pole Boys, Paul Ruas. Paul Ruas has produced more Springboks than any other school over there. I played probably the best level of rugby I played. I played in the top club division there for Villagers. We won the league. We beat Stellenbosch, who obviously, they're the biggest rugby institution in the world. God knows how many teams they have, the university down there, how many internationals they produce. But we beat them. And I ended up playing a couple of games for Western Province A as well when I was out there, and actually got offered to stay out there professionally as I was due to come back. I didn't. I came back and didn't really. Again, I came back in December. I thought I could pick up a rugby contract somewhere. I was fooling myself. I didn't have anyone representing me. I'd never played age group rugby, never even played county rugby, So I didn't really have any sort of pedigree for anyone looking at a CV to go by. So, well, what's he done? It was more, I've got to turn up and prove myself, which is probably the story of my career. I've always liked and had to sort of prove myself. Nothing's been given to me in terms of a sports point of view I'm talking about. I was lucky to go to a good school and everything like that, and I always appreciate that privilege. But, I had adversity. I failed exams, passed exams academically. I knew what it was like to sort of have to, redo them or whatever it was, and, flourish in certain things that I was gifted for. And the same with sport. I played in all the sports teams, but for various reasons, whether it be getting in a schoolyard scrap or maybe a bit of attitudinal problems, I might be sort of dropped to teach me a lesson from the A's to the C's, that sort of under 14s, under 15s. And okay, right, well, learn your lesson. Perhaps that wasn't the best decision that I made or whatever it was. I've got to fight for my place again. And against, I had that standard as well when you were in there, but also felt that nothing was assured, nothing was a given. So, every single training practice, every single practice, whatever, you did have to sort of prove yourself. So it gave me belief anyway. Coming back to the point is, out in South Africa, I'm playing with Springboks and Super Rugby players at club level for a certain period. How it worked over there is you had your club season, which was sort of late March to sort of September. I mean, this is back in the day. You had your Super Rugby season, which was sort of March to sort of May. And then the international season over in the Southern Hemisphere would be for the next two or 3 months. And during that would be the Curry Cup. And for various periods there, and you still see in New Zealand a bit, you see Artie Zavea go back to his club and play and all that for match fitness or whatever. But these players actually had to come back for the club for certain periods. The Springboks probably for less, maybe 4 or 5 games. The Super Rugby players played about 8 to 10 games with you. So suddenly the standard for that period was very, very, very high, much higher than I'd played before. And suddenly felt that I really enjoyed mixing it. I enjoyed, obviously, self-improvement. I enjoyed challenging myself against better players. And as I say, I came back, nothing was on the table. So got a job, worked in the city, probably, getting tomato juice for the boss or whatever like that, while possibly learning about fund management. But my distraction is quite funny, actually. When I think a few years later when I played for England, because my old man actually helped me out with that job, he bumped into my boss and he said, he was always distracted. I could always tell he loved this sport. He wanted to be out on the sports field, when he came to us. And throughout that summer, I made a decision. Look, I think I was 23, 22 or something like that. I'm at a crossroads now. Either, okay, I go down the sort of city route and I can play a decent level for Rosslyn Park or whoever it was, or I actually give this a good go. And I think luckily, I know fathers and mothers are much more supportive of it now because they've seen the success and sport has grown so much. But back then it was like, it's not a proper job. With certain parents it would have been, not all. But because my dad had been a professional squash player for 15 years, he was all for it. Of course he was. He was like, you got to follow your passion or follow your dream if you like. And, if you fail, you fail. But at least you've given it a go, right? There'll be no regrets from that point of view. I didn't want to look back and go, if only. I knew, I was better than him or whatever it might have been. But again, no pedigree. So, you put your application for Quins and Saracens, London clubs at the time, and you can turn up for a few weeks. I did turn up for Wasps actually for a week. That didn't sort of work out. They ended up signing ex-London Irish back rower instead. And I have actually spoken to Sean Edwards about that since, and he does sort of giggle and laugh at everything. But things could have been different. And then Oral came in, my South African coach put me in touch with a South African agent to sort of represent me. And he said, look, they're not Premiership, but they've got a backer now, Dave Whelan, JJB man, and they want to go for the Premiership. Oral. And I'd heard of Oral because I remember there was a BBC Two sort of late night series on two clubs in a small town in the northwest in Wigan Rugby League, which is the biggest rugby league club in the world, and Oral Rugby Union. And at the time, Oral were going for the Darry Morris, Nigel Heslop sort of era, and they were going for the title, and they missed out by a point, I think. And they sort of documented that season, and it was new for sports documentaries and sort of on BBC Two. So I had heard of them, and I was like, oh god, I've got to go up north, have I? I spoke to Maurice Lindsay, the chairman, and he sold me the dream. I played for Rosslyn Park at the time. We played him in a cup game, the old school Pilkington Cup, like the FA Cup. You play everyone in all the leagues, and we ran them close actually, but I could see the talent in that side. And the next week I was up there and absolutely loved it, and had 3 brilliant years up there. Made some really, really good friends, and we had a side that was good enough to get into the Prem, but we just missed out. And then they went under. Then I joined Rotherham with a group of us who also went under 2 months later, and suddenly you're left again. Without a club, is your dream going to be shattered? But you try and pull a few strings, try and network. And a good friend of mine at Oral that played at Saracens beforehand knew Mark Evans, who was the boss at Quins, and he took a punt on me for 3 months. So yeah, basically driven by the fact that I had self-belief. Not really sure where that might have come from, but I did believe in myself, and because I believed in myself, I was happy to keep proving myself, proving things to myself and other people, and the people that matter in terms of selecting players, but also most importantly myself. And I suppose that's what's driven what you were talking about earlier, Fitzy, in terms of my journey is self-belief coupled with a need to sort of prove yourself and a drive to do that. Why I am where I am now.
Yeah, and you had the support as well, as you said. When you were at Rosslyn Park, did you think you'd be playing for England a few years later?
It's a good question because my dad's no longer with us, and he retold this story. I think when I was playing for England, I think it was a debut, and he said that I walked into his study or whatever it was, and we were having a chat, and I said to him, I'm going to play for England, and this was before I went professional. So I can't remember that conversation ever happening, but I must have believed it, Liam, to want to push so much, to be perfectly honest, and put the work in and everything. And I just love the game. And I think when you love something you're passionate about, you want to go as far as possible, don't you? Really. Yeah. And you also know it's a short lifespan. I made my debut at 28 and managed to get 50 caps, but you've got limited time to do it as well. So you've got to grab whichever opportunities come your way.
That's an incredible story, and just really speaks volumes about you and your resilience and self-belief. And also, whether it's business, life, sports, staying in that arm wrestle, keeping true to the goal and keep taking steps forward, even if you can't see the finish line. It's amazing stuff, really. Let's go back to 2011. England are out of the World Cup. Confidential player debriefs, words spoken in private in a dressing room, stripped of all context, are leaked to the press. One line attributed to you became the story of an entire campaign. You're reading your own name in the headlines. There's no right of reply. That won't make it worse. In those first few days, what did you actually do? What were the conversations you were having with yourself about how you were going to carry this?
Yeah, well, it was, we'd underachieved at that World Cup, which probably, a lot of the stories of England at World Cups. And, we went out in the quarterfinal. I remember it was sort of early-ish December. I was down the pub and I had a few missed calls from a journalist, Ian Stafford. And I thought, I don't know what this is about. Probably about the European game we've got at the time, Quins have got, that weekend or whatever. Then there was a voicemail, look, can you get back to me very, very urgently when I go home? I didn't. Then a few phone calls the next day, and I sort of spoke to him, and he said it was confidential. This report will be confidential. It was leaked. I think Martin Thomas at the RFU leaked it allegedly, and just try and create discord and everything because yeah, his position was under threat, I think, and he wanted other people's position under threat with no regard for the players and the confidentiality that was promised. But look, that is what it is. That's life. Is one of the things that came out. Yeah, was oh well, that's 35 grand down the toilet. A comment, and at the time I read it, and I did say that could been me. Yeah, when it was just printed in the paper, I can't remember ever saying it. I can never remember saying it. But I say that'd be the sort of gallows humour. We're out of World Cup, right? We're we're absolutely distraught. Everything that's been planned and put into that, okay, we have failed in that quarter final against France. All right, so someone's got to get knocked out. We've been knocked out. You've then had about plenty of time with your teammates afterwards. You're not saying much. No one's saying much. I don't know whether I did or I didn't. But going back to your point is, he said, look, this is a month later or whatever. There's suggestions coming out that you were the person that said it. And at the time, I've always been a pretty direct and honest guy anyway, which sometimes can not be to your benefit. You probably do need to take advice. But I said, you know what, Ian? I could well have said it. I don't know whether I did, but I could well have said it. But it didn't deter from the fact that of anyone, right, I am not driven on the rugby field. And it doesn't matter if you are, by the way, anyway, driven by an incentive, a financial incentive anyhow, which he knew. Having played the game as an amateur and gone through what I've got. But I could well have said it, but it's gallows humour. If I have said it, it's an hour and a half after kickoff, and it's said tongue in cheek, maybe to lighten some gloom, because we can't turn back the clock. You can't turn back the clock, and I realise some people take a lot longer to get over disappointment than others. We all sort of mourn in different ways in our own way, but from my side, I've managed to get over losses and being knocked out, in critical games quicker than most in terms of the immediate aftermath of disappointment. It never leaves you in terms of your professional career. Of course it doesn't. Losing the 07 World Cup final, being knocked out in European or whatever they like, it will still be there, and there'll still be the odd what if moments and things like that. But you can't, in my view, you can't dwell on it. It's sort of what next. There does obviously need to be a mourning period and everything, but we had that. So as far as that was concerned, Fitzy, that's the way I sort of approached it. And then it became a bit of a story. I think whichever paper he was writing for, he announced it, and it became a bit of a. I thought, all right, well, I better call up my agent at the time. What do we think about this? I don't think there was much more that could have been done. Although I did get, I know you sort of say you had no right to reply and everything, but I was sort of half tempted to sort of say, okay, well, I'm not sure if I did say it or I didn't say it, but if I did say it, what I'm more disappointed with is the fact that teammates feel that they need to say that someone, or I, if it was me, have said it as a group. As soon as that house of cards fell, right, the whole culture of the place fell apart because you're willing to try and throw a teammate under the bus, right, as a cause for us getting knocked out of the World Cup. And therefore, it wasn't my agent that advised me this. It was a couple of mates, actually. And I thought, well, I could actually make a storm in a teacup, I suppose, at the time, but make a bigger deal of this by saying, all right, I did say it, but I want to know who put this in the report. Who's the one going around sort of informing on your teammates that you were there, throughout the entire World Cup camp, the whole build up for the last 4 years, right? That you were shoulder to shoulder in that game, and now suddenly, you want to attribute a comment that's got nothing to do with anything in terms of, a mental put off to another player. And I suppose that was the only pushback I could have had at the time, but I just sort of let it go really and sort of move on. And what you've got luckily after a World Cup disappointment like that is you've got your club. So my main goal was go back to Quins. We got the two finals. We'd won one in 03. Obviously, I wasn't a part of that. 07, we got to the final. We'd won the Six Nations that year, and we'd underachieved at the World Cup, right? So we'd failed to meet expectations. But I remember going back. I said, I'll have a week off at Quins. Quins want to give me 2 weeks off. I said, no, I want to just get back and play. Do my talking on the field, get back, play for my club, who were on a pretty good run at the time, in my absence during the World Cup. And at the end of the day, it happened to be a very, very good year for us. So that's where, my thinking was.
Just digging into that, Nick, on that point, because this is really important, because it's actually you know, the mindset of an elite performer, just to concentrate on what's important and what really matters, which for you was getting back to your club and performing. What gives you the strength not to contest what's being said in the media about you when you probably could contest it, and you chose not to go to war against what was being said?
I could have gone. I could have pushed back. I can to this day, and it's 15 years later. So if I could remember saying it, I'd tell you I remember saying it, right? But I would still stand by, the context of which it was said, and of how little or zero importance and effect that had on the team's performance, and lack of performance during that entire campaign. If I heard someone else say it 100% into me, I, of course, because justice is important to me, do you know what I mean? Fairness and all that sort of stuff. I would have 100% gone hard at it because I was unsure, and there was no proof either way, and it was out there. I was also advised that actually, yes, look, it is a throwaway comment. Most people, if not all, sort of understand exactly where it's from. It will soon be, forgotten about.
Fish and chips,
I,
fish and chip
well,
wrapper.
fish and chip wrapper.
Yeah.
But it probably wasn't, because I wasn't then selected for England for a number of years after that. And I'm not sure whether that had something to do with maybe my age at the time. I was 33, and Stuart Lancaster came in and wanted to go with a younger group, or whether it had a little bit to do with that comment. I don't really think it did, but only he would know, I suppose, because I did meet him when he let me know. I remember it was Christmas Eve at the club, actually. He let me know I wouldn't be part of his plans for the 2012 Six Nations. And he said, look, that comment's not got anything to do with it. This new generation of players. So there's people like myself, Simon Shaw, Johnny Wilkinson, Mark Cueto, Mike Tyndall, Steve Thompson. All of us were sort of around the same age, and had featured in a few campaigns. Is he wanted to move on, and he had been coaching the pathways with England at the time, and knew those players well. And I think he felt that he wanted to sort of create his own culture, Stuart. And when he took them on, and it's easier to do that with people and younger people that will obviously just be absolutely delighted to be in the England squad. And I think that's what he felt from that point of view. But yeah, I was lucky enough that I could just carry on playing and just do my talking on the field.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if it had been, say after a summer tour or whatever like that, and you're away on a holiday, then there's a pre-season, and then because we had that with Bloodgate with Harlequins, man, that was an awful time. So we had the Leinster quarter-final in 2009. Another bit of adversity, but mainly, not individual, but from the club point of view, about getting back and proving people wrong, because everyone had called us cheats and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not saying it wasn't cheating, by the way, but we know that more than one club was doing it at the time, and that's not justifying it. But my point being is, I remember it was sort of pre-season, it was just around us all the time, this sort of Bloodgate stench. We would train out in Millfield, we would train at our home base in Guildford, play pre-season games, and it was still ongoing. The whole trial with Dean, the doctor, Tom Williams, the player, and everything was going on for about 2-3 months, and it was front and back page news. Whereas with this, after 2011, the rugby was still going on. You're back to club, back to Europe, back to Premiership. New England coach coming in, because Jono resigned after that as well. So there was other things going on. I think it would have maybe been a bit different if it had been, during the off season.
And just to clarify there, Stuart Lancaster came to Harlequins to sit with you and to tell you this face to face, that you were not going
Yes,
to.
the World Cup would have finished end of October. Comment coming out in the paper was maybe something around early sort of December. Didn't really last that long, I don't think, but yeah. He spoke to me, and his thing was about bringing through these younger players. I obviously challenged him on that. I said, well, the quickest way to develop young players, Stuart, is to have seniority alongside it, right? People that have been there and done that, because not only are they going to help with the standard of it, and at the time, I remember I just got man of the match down in Toulouse, and he goes, mate, you're playing really well. It's not that you're not the best number 8. It's just this is the path I'm going to take. And to be fair to Stuart, people don't remember this. He was only there interim for the Six Nations. So he was only going to do 5 games for England, and that was it. So if he wants to do it, without sort of senior players, maybe, not, I wouldn't say pushing back on him, but maybe challenging him in certain bits. and he wants to do it with the players that he knows, and he thinks he's only got the job for 5 games, then I can understand it from his point of view. Put it that way. Now I'm a coach. You still want to pick your best players. Of course, you want to pick your best players. And I think maybe if he got the job for 4 years, I don't know. You'd have to ask him. But if he got the job for 4 years, he might have blended some seniority in there, which would have been obviously the sensible move and the right move, because we see that, throughout sides who do transition and transition well, that you build the cohesion, but you've still got sort of like the cement there, and then eventually they sort of, when they can no longer do it, you've had enough experience and caps in the guys that have come through and everything. Going back 2012, and then Stuart kept the job. I think he had a decent Six Nations, and he kept the job then to the next World Cup.
For sure. I mean, you could argue the positive and negative argument and counter argument as to why to take you, why not to take you, but the point I was that interests me, the fact that he actually personally came down and spoke to you, which is the right way of doing it. But so often we don't see that. It's a phone call or a text message or an email, and you lose that personal context, especially when it's a tough conversation like he had with you.
Face to face, yeah.
For sure. So the door closes and stays closed for 3 years after that conversation with Stuart. You're 33, then 34, then 35. Still one of the best forwards in the Premiership. Twice named the league's forward of the year during that stretch. And every season the England squad gets announced without you. Monday morning, back at the stoop, no selection to play for. What are you actually training for in those years, and what's the standard you're holding yourself to when nobody with the power to change your international situation is watching?
Well, that's that was never even in my thinking, to be honest, Fitzy. Is you're playing the highest standard of club rugby. You are playing with and against internationals. But this is the elite in terms of what you can try and win every single week, but trophies at the end of the year. And you're sort of driven to, as you should be, because they're your main paymasters anyway, and they were my one club in the Premiership, is to achieve things with Harlequins and become a better player with Harlequins. Yes, I come back to the point in terms of, part of my career has been to prove people wrong, and that's a big driver and that's a big motivator for me, and I don't apologise for it. Is there was always that, and I did happen to be playing my best rugby, I think 2012 to 2014, and winning man of the match or whatever it might be, and I was never sort of I told you so about it ever. It was, look, I'm still playing well, and Graham Roundtree probably came down a few more. He was the forwards coach for England at the time. He came down more than the other coaches, and sometimes he'd speak to me, and again, be along the same lines. Look, you're playing really, really well at the moment. These are the guys we're going with. So, they did communicate. It wasn't that often, but there was that face-to-face communication to let us know. I mean, clearly, some of the communication around the international front happens via your coaches as well, Conor O'Shea, and John Kingston was a forwards coach at the time. But for me, it was about, I just loved playing rugby, training, whether it's for Roslyn Park or my old boys when I was at uni, whether it was down at villages in South Africa. I just loved playing and training rugby. And I was very, very lucky in my career. I never had a major injury as well. So I never had the lows of the long-term injury out and all that sort of stuff. I was never present at training and ever present really for selection most Saturdays as well, on the back of that. And I appreciated that, and I think probably part of the reason there is, guys, is I didn't walk into anything and suddenly you expect things to happen for you, which is probably a bit of an issue with the younger players today, is they're not prepared, for the pitfalls really and the letdowns and the failures. Not their fault, by the way. Whereas I'd never really had any of that. I'd earned everything I'd got, and it was up to me to earn it again, to pull on the international shirt. But otherwise, we were playing brilliant rugby at Harlequins. We were one of the best teams in the land. We were the best team in the land for that. I think we're in the playoffs 3 or 4 years in a row, and that was the driving force as far as I was concerned. Helping the club, but also making sure that I was improving every single day.
Did you expect to be recalled for England at that time? Were you expecting a call?
No, I wasn't. No, I think after sort of 2 years, you sort of realise, okay, well, they moved on. That's fine. That happens with millions and millions of people, doesn't it? People talk about selection all the time. How's he out? How's he? Sometimes the face doesn't fit or whatever, or it might be the style of play. I don't know. But I was sort of, right, well, my lot is whatever I'd had up to that point with England. And it was about doing what I could from a Harlequins point of view and, helping them to sort of achieve what we could achieve, because we had a little bit of a sort of mini dynasty. We didn't really push on as much as we should have done, to be honest with you. And that's a bit of a sort of regret in terms of we should have been more successful with what we had. But that was at the forefront of my mind professionally, is what's going on at the club.
Yeah, I mean that's a great mindset. Just focus on what you got to do, the small things. Just focus on playing for Quins, which makes the next England chapter even more remarkable. I mean, am I correct in saying this, that you were recalled at 36 in February 2015? You came off the bench against Italy to score. Hope you don't mind me saying, but England's oldest try scorer in history. Is that correct? And the ending.
It's a record. It's a record. I'll take it.
Does it still stand? And then the ending's even better. You're left out of the initial World Cup squad. You're literally standing on the Twickenham touchline working as a pundit when the call comes to join at age 37. And you score a hat trick and get man of the match in your last England game. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, that's correct. Context of them. So again, I was still obviously playing pretty well for the club, and I think the two number 8s at the time, and generally speaking, I ended up playing a little bit of second row, although I don't like to admit when in my later careers. But number 8s can all play number 6 as well. But anyway, I was a number 8. You generally, when you're selecting, there's two number 8s in the squad. So at the time it was Billy Vanapola and Ben Morgan, and Billy was playing well. Billy was playing really well. Ben Morgan got injured. I think he got injured. He broke his leg or something the Saturday before the first Six Nations game. And I never even thought I'd be in, because, I'd had nearly 4 years of not getting selected, even when there were people injured, and they'd just call up another number 8 and everything. And I remember I got a load of messages just from mates, mates playing the game currently, mates who hadn't played the game, and even other mates. You're going to get called out. You're going to get called out. I remember having Sunday lunch in Wimbledon Village. No, load of rubbish. But, not going to happen. And then I can't remember how it happened, actually. I can't remember who contacted me. But what I do remember is the following Tuesday. So we played Leicester on a Saturday. Because I got man of the match against Leicester, actually. So I think it was on the back of that, because it might have been a bit of a headline and Morgan was injured or something like that. So people might have read it, which is why I was getting peppered. But on the Tuesday, I met Stuart Lancaster in, I don't know where it was, but a pub in Surrey somewhere. After training, he said, "Can you come and meet me?" And he'd met Danny Kerr before, who was a part of his squad, always was. So that was probably more around, his game, but also around me. Would he still be interested, and all that sort of stuff. And obviously Danny, my mate, he said, yeah, of course he would. He still wants to fulfill things in the white jersey and everything. So I met Stuart there, and, we had a good chat. And he said, right, okay, you're going to be in my squad. And then he named me in the squad. Then I came off the bench. It was down in Cardiff, and England had been trounced, I think, 2 years before in that Grand Slam game down there. And that was our opening game. And, Cardiff, when Wales were decent in those days under Gats, it was a tough place to play, and we won. I came off the bench in that game, and then came off the bench the week after at Twickenham, to your point, Liam, and ended up scoring. I was off the bench most of that Six Nations. I was used, for sort of 25, 30 minutes, didn't start any games, and then continued playing for the club. And then, you have the wider squad come out. Ben Morgan's back to fitness. They decided to go with him. And I remember we even had to have a trial game at the end of the World Cup camp for the two selections were myself and Ben Morgan, and Sam Burgess and Luther Burrell. And, we had a tete-a-tete in two different teams, and the whole squad was meant to be named that day, and then we were going to go out for dinner. But the coaches stayed in till 10:30 at night. They decided to go with Ben. Let me know the next morning. Obviously, I was straight back at the club, disappointed, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Did everything I could to get in the side. It did sort of seem a little bit like, well, you brought me in for the Six Nations. You brought me in, and I'm certainly age-wise, at the time, got to be sort of 3 years older than the next guy, 4 years older than the next guy, right? With 2 World Cups under my belt. One where we've done pretty well, the other where we've, not done so well, not up to expectations. Is, well, if you're bringing me in for Six Nations, why not bring me in for sort of the World Cup? Again, it was obviously I've got to be good enough to be playing there, which I felt I was. I felt I was playing better then. But look, he made his choice, and then Billy gets injured, I think, second or third game in, and then I got called in. But that wasn't such a happy time from a squad perspective. So we'd been knocked out by Australia the week before, and I'm playing against Uruguay in the last group game. And yes, I score a hat-trick, but that whole week was probably the worst I'd seen in terms of a team wanting to be anywhere, which you can imagine. I wasn't part of what happened before, since they'd announced their squad and then lost to Wales and Australia. But we went up to Manchester, we played at the Man City Stadium, and as far as I was concerned, I knew it was my last game for England. I knew, and that was it. And all you can do is play your best, prepare as well as you can, play your best. But I just remember, the coaches all knew that they were going to get the boot. It was England's least successful World Cup. We were at home. We'd been knocked out in the group stage. The players that had obviously been a part of Stu's setup for 4 years, and even the guys in the last year or whatever it was, they were just beside themselves. And I just remember we had about 2 training sessions where it was just pointless. It was nothing but touch rugby, and it was a pretty morose place to be. But as far as I was concerned, we were playing at the Man City Stadium, a new venue. We're pulling on a white shirt, and I tell you what, the England support were fantastic. I remember we turned up there, and I think a lot of players were quite inspired by that, who had been in the doldrums throughout the whole week on the bus. We drove in; they were fully behind us. Fair play. Australia were better than us. Wales, obviously, it was that decision to kick for the corner or kick for the poles the week before. That's done and dusted. We're still getting behind our national team. And yeah, look, finished off with a hat-trick, but it would have been better if it was a hat-trick in the World Cup final. But at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control. And I know people say that a lot, but it is true. The worst thing for me to do would have been to join in the sort of sullen mood and, be negative, not necessarily toxic, because it was what it was. We were out of our home World Cup, but, I just sort of not try and pick them up, but just sort of be there as, a support, as a sounding board as well. Still being, the senior player, or certainly the oldest player as far as age is concerned, is, I understand it's a horrible feeling, but, we've still got a job to do. We're still lucky enough to do it. Is at least make it count, because you'll never forget that your whole life. The guys that were part of that whole campaign, it'll be with them for the whole life. But, you're still pulling on that jersey this weekend, still got a game to prepare for. But it was tough. It was tough. Easily the toughest week in terms of preparation, whether it be club, amateur, professional, or international, that I've seen and been involved in.
It's a constant theme, though, Nick, from what you discussed, which is always concentrate on the next task ahead. Is a great mindset as well. One really important question to answer is, like, when you're called up and you're 37, were you rising to the occasion, or were you falling back on the standards that you've held for the last 4 years whilst you're kind of in the international wilderness?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a cliche, but it's definitely true in rugby. Is you can only rise or fall to the standard of your training and preparation, what you do, right, rather than rise to the occasion. Because rugby, if you just take a Maverick, right, you take a Michael Jordan in basketball. Now, I understand the numbers are slightly different. You've got 5 players there. He can dominate a game. He could probably be off his game for 3 or 4 weeks and then turn up and dominate, because he's done it so often. Rugby, yes, you might get, a player come in and he tears it up. But after about 3 or 4 games at the top level, teams know how to shut you down. You've got to find a bit more to your game, or you've got to bring your teammates into the game a bit more, whatever it might be. We've all seen this, strawberry seasons or whatever you want to call it. Is rugby has an amazing ability to keep it as the team. If you're successful, it is the team. Individuals, match winners are massively important. Of course they are, X factor moments. But you can't just do it all by yourself. That has been proven time and time again in rugby union, arguably more than any other sport, team sport. And, from that point of view, it's about making sure that you're just doing the nuts and bolts of your job as well as you can do. Yes, training with England is going to be harder. It's going to be more challenging. 1, because obviously the quality you're up against. 2, because you know what you're going to be up against, and you had to step that up. So when I got in England camp for 2 weeks before coming back in for that Wales game, I had to push myself hard, and I'd probably push myself in a lot of the Quins ones, because Quins is over a season. You can have intense sessions, but sometimes you're sort of on down weeks, but you still want to peak for games as part of the periodisation of planning the year. With England, you're in that camp for 8 weeks in the Six Nations. All right, where you can get the work in is in that initial block, up to maybe just past that second game. Then it's very much about making sure that you hit targets with certain moments, but it's not overkill. It's about sort of honing your craft, really sharpening the axe, isn't it? But that first 2 weeks, yeah, I did. Andy Farrell was a defence coach, so there was no hiding place, and he was brilliant. Quins weren't really known for defence. We were more of an attacking entity, and to be coached by Andy was brilliant. And I obviously played with him in 07, so I sort of knew him as a player as well. And he brought some real energy and enjoyment and positivity to being without the ball. So as I come back to it, I was 37, but far from seeing it, seen it all, done it all, or whatever like this. For me, it was the thrill of working with, a very inspiring coach from what he's doing at the moment and what he's done beforehand. So it was just as exciting as when I came in 2007 under Brian Ashton.
Excellent.
And you've got to maintain that enthusiasm. As soon as you lose that enthusiasm, as soon as you're sort of thinking about retirement, you've already retired. You're already on the slippery slope down, and that is the sad truth of professional sport. As soon as you're thinking, even if we all wake up in different moods. Some days are better than others. That's fine. But if you're thinking you don't really have the drive to eat the right meal or to do the stretching or whatever it might be, and that's a continual factor, then you better watch out, because you'll soon be out the door.
Yeah.
It's a very good point. Let's take that on and unpack 2022. You've joined Worcester Warriors as a coach. Few months after you join, the club goes into administration and is suspended from the Premiership. Staff unpaid, livelihoods gone, 150-year-old institution dissolving in real time. You're one of the leaders inside that organisation that is failing for reasons that you have no control of. What does that week actually look like from the inside? What did you find in yourself responsible that was never in the job description?
Well, that was, I still feel that's a great missed opportunity, guys, because Worcester made me a few very, very generous offers when I was at Quins. So you always knew they had money, and they were throwing money at players. They would pay players that they certainly weren't worth what they were paying, right? But they also got stars in. They got Chris Latham in. You remember, they got Tui Tupo in, Rico Gear in, and everything. They were buying superstars. So they, from the outside, always looked like they were flush. Right? Cecil Duckworth was there, the Allens were there after. Had no idea about these two cowboys that had taken it over, that just ran it in the ground without, a pot to piss in, so to say. Absolutely no idea, because it wasn't, it was never something that came across my mind that I've got to inspect the finances and who owns this place and what do they do and everything like that. At the time, it was Steve Diamond had come in there. I was at Newcastle. Newcastle were reducing their budget, so made the decision to leave there because Steve Diamond wanted a defence and forwards coach. And, we've just had our second child as well, so it's going to move us closer to London, where the in-laws and the family were and everything, because we, moved to Cheltenham, which is half an hour from Worcester. So Seymour Curdy was, it wasn't Red Bull like it is now. Seymour Curdy was pulling the budget, and they were already spending half of what everyone else was spending. So for me, it's like, oh my God, we've got a golden opportunity. We've got Steve Diamond here that knows the Premiership like the back of his hand. He's dealt with a pretty low budget at Sale, but now he's going to be able to spend right up to the cap. I met him a number of times leading up to this, getting to know each other, because we've known each other across the sort of the white line, if you like, but never actually known each other that well. We had played him as Newcastle and performed really, certainly defensively, performed really, really well. And he was sort of, that's what we need. That's what we need down at Worcester. They were always the side that no one really spoke about in the Premiership. You could name, there was 13 sides then. People would probably name 12 and forget about Worcester. No offence, but they'd probably forget about Worcester. If you weren't in the Worcester area or Gloucester area, probably. If there was one to forget. And it was about putting them on the map. So me and Don was talking about putting them on the map, but giving them a firm identity. And they never really had an identity either. They had no backbone, certainly from a defence set piece. You always knew you could get on top of them. Yes, they had some class backs that could score tries from everywhere, but if you deny them possession and time and space, you know what can happen, right? We've all been in those teams, right, when you're planning and preparing for that opposition. So he bought me and Steve. He bought Stevie Scott, who's the scrum coach. Who's the scrum coach down at Bath, very good scrum coach. Mark Jones was there, the attack coach, who's the head coach of Ospreys, very, very good coach as well. Small coaching team, which is important. because you need to be collaborative, but you also need to have creative conflict as coaches, okay? And to get the best, but you can't have too many. You can't have too many having their bits and pieces on the field, because otherwise the session overruns or you don't actually spend enough time on something that's important, right? So Dimes had a very, very good plan, very simple, clear plan. And he also had a simple identity. So for me, it was like, this is a great opportunity. We could put them on the map here as a consistent team. I'm not saying we're going to win anything, but be consistent in terms of what you put out every week, and then you see where it goes. And then 7 weeks in, we did get paid the first month, but the day me and the family moved down from Newcastle to Cheltenham, I've told the story a few times, is I had to pop into training at 7 o'clock in the morning. So the missus was coming down later and I was collecting the keys. And we get in there at 7:30. And there's been rumours circulating in the press about, you know, they might go into administration. I've got mates who are agents who are saying, listen, you guys are in trouble. And they've got players there as well. And Steve Diamond said, I've got no good news for you lot. We're going into administration. And that's the day that I'm completing on a house in Cheltenham where I've got 2 mortgages on. We carry on for about 5 more weeks. During that 5 weeks, there's, Dimes has been as positive as he can. He gets a consortium together. I mean, Begbie's trainer, the administrators were just, they didn't handle it with any sort of integrity or correct decision making, and that's being kind. Dimes had a consortium, they gave it to another consortium to take over. It took a long time, they just wanted to collect their money, and we pretty much knew the game was up probably before we played our final game, which happened to be against Newcastle actually. But meanwhile, you're not getting paid, and I've moved the family to Cheltenham where we don't really have any connections, and I've got to find a job. But no other Premiership team is looking for an assistant coach because, well, they've only 3 games in, even if they're not happy with how they're performing, and they're not going to be, they've got their coaching team. So it was really, really bad timing, obviously. And it was a very, very stressful position to be in. And you're constantly thinking about, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to get a job? You scratch around, use your network, do a little bit of, consultancy work for a few firms, do some coaching master classes, an ex Gloucester and England colleague, got me a job sort of helping with the Cheltenham College School for about half a term. But it's nothing that's really going to sort you out sort of career wise, and certainly even immediate financially. It just keeps the wall from the door and gives you a bit of purpose, doesn't it? And it was around November, late November time. I just get through an ex colleague actually, Jordan Turner, Hall of Harlequins, knows a coach at Chinner, and they've just sacked the DOR. And I'll be perfectly honest, I didn't know. I'd never heard of Chinner. I didn't know where they were. I thought they were either Forest Dean, which is basically the west, but furthest west, or they're furthest east. So I had a look, and I thought, well, it's Director of Rugby. I've been looking at Premiership, elites, even top 14, in France, where a few options were there, as hard logistically as it would have been with the family moving and not having a support around them. But you've got to consider everything. And nothing was really working and happening. It was a sort of waiting game and everything. It's like, I can't afford to wait. So it sort of came up, and it was National 1. And I was like, well, this is sort of 3rd level. I want elites, back in the Prem, or top level. And I sort of gave it some thought, and I thought, well, it's Director of Rugby. Tell you what, there's a bigger remit there. There's different skill sets to challenge myself and possibly learn. Being it part-time or semi-professional, I can still do the coaching, whereas I think a Director of Rugby probably does the odd bit of coaching, probably can't coach a whole area, like defence, like forwards, like attack, as well as do your Director of Rugby jobs around recruitment pathways, managing the board and the media and all that sort of stuff. There are some that do, but it's pretty all-consuming if you did, and you wouldn't have any sort of time away. This could be manageable? And I spoke to the boss. He told me what the problem was. They were 2 wins from 11 in National 1. I said, send me some games, and it's very, very hard to judge abilities of players. One, when you go down 2 leagues from what you're used to working with, and then when you're looking on sort of not grainy footage, but different angled footage. Right. Sort of like, guys, it's hard to get a grab hold of this. So I sort of said, well, send me the games against the best sides. How we done against it, because then I can compare at least against the top of the league at the time. So they did. And I thought, and basically the rumours were that they were not achieving their potential for what the squad was in terms of the quality squad. I'm not saying they should have been top in that year, but they were underperforming. Well, that's okay. All right. So there's something to work with here. So 2 wins from 11, second from bottom, and then we, I went in there at the beginning of December 2022. I didn't manage to coach them properly until I think the end of December, because all the pitches were iced, which is something you don't get in the Premiership either, because you've got either underfloor heating or you've got the covers, right? So you're now doing, okay, well, it's sort of, this is amateur, isn't it? So we had to do little skills in the marquee and weight, just sort of like circuit, power endurance circuits or whatever it was. And we prepared for games, but the games were iced off. So we didn't actually play my first game to the beginning of January, which was a Friday night against Rosslyn Park, my old team from a long, long time ago then, 21, 22 years. And Rosslyn Park were top of the league. And we played them at home, and it was a bumper crowd. It's 1,500. Friday nights there are good. And it was all new to me. So, you didn't have the big stadium, but you had about 4 bars around the pitch, a ski bar, whatever it was. Everyone was close to the hoardings. And I went in a gantry, and we went 12-0 down after about 10 minutes. I went, oh, it's not so easy, this coach at a low level, is this? So we won the game 48-12. There was a big buzz around the place. We then won the next 3 games. Then we lost a few. Then we won a few. Anyway, we avoided relegation. We won 11 out of 15, finished mid-table. So pretty successful. But for me, I was only there for that half a season or whatever. I still wanted to be back in the Premiership. And at the time, I did have an offer to be assistant coach at a Premiership club. And I made the decision to stay at Chinner because part of it was, and you guys will obviously know this very, very well, certainly in business. And I've known mainly from my coaching time, at the sort of 5 professional outfits I've been in, is it's so important to be trusted and valued. It really is. When you don't feel there's that synergy and there's that chemistry there, and through the tough times, everyone can deal with the good times well, but through the tough times, when it's under pressure, and these guys, the board, the owner, the principal owner, and everything like this, they were absolutely desperate for me to stay. Clearly, my remit was bigger than what I'd had before. The control I had in terms of the direction as well, with their support, that was important to me. That was important to me. And I'm not saying I wouldn't have got this as an assistant at the Premiership club that, was the other option on the table. But I was like, actually, right, if I do take this, what's our ambition? Because I'm in it to win it. I'm not in it to stay in National 1. I'm in it to win it. Now, we do it the right way. There are sides in the National Leagues that go over the cap, right? Because there's not much of a sanction. It might be a 10 grand fine or something. It's pretty pathetic. I was like, we'll do it the right way. Okay, but I need your support throughout. And they said, yeah, you've got it. But even then, I never set the goal of being promoted the next year. In the back of my mind, I was like, we can if we get a lot of things right. And the next year, we won the league. We lost 4 games. I think we lost 1 game in the last, from beginning or mid-November through to the end of April or whatever. We only lost 1 game, and we marched to the title. And and then we were in the champ for the first time, and part of that journey, which has taken us somewhere else.
So we spoke about this before we went on the show. We talked about the culture that you built at Chinner. Talked about obviously with budget, particularly in the Championship, you got quite a low budget compared to some of the other clubs. How do you go about from day one, walking into a team which has lost, had 2 wins from 11 games, to winning the title, your league, National 1? What did you change about the culture? And can you tell us more about the culture that you're building at Chinner when perhaps resources are limited in terms of finances?
Yes. So, the first thing I spoke to him about, and I said, right, at the end of the day, you want to know who selects the side. I select the side. And I'm going to select on these 2 elements. I said, and I put it up there, and it's still up there, with another one as well. And I say, this is the type of player that I want in my team. And I said, you've got to be a tough guy, you've got to be a tough player, and you've got to be an intelligent player. And I'll tell you why. I said, you've got to be tough because cowards get you beat, and you've got to be intelligent because dumb guys get you beat. And it's that simple. And I said, the intelligent thing might never get to every player, which obviously there's a few laughs and all that sort of stuff and pointing fingers in directions of people who can't remember lineouts or whatever. I said, but there's different forms of intelligence. Intelligence of just doing your job and knowing your job very well is intelligence. It's not you can make 3 decisions at once and, you can understand the momentum of a game. There's senior players for that, right? Or game leaders for that. Tough comes in different ways. We all know the obvious tough. You work hard, you stick your head where it hurts, whatever. But tough for me is you enjoy the pressure moments, embrace the pressure moments, right? Tough for me is you might be a small number 10. You've been bounced off twice, but you come back for more because you think you're going to make the next one, right? But in order for that to happen, is you've got to believe in what we're training, which is what I'm there for, right? So I've got to bring a quality to the training, and you speak to these guys now, and I've still got players. There's actually still a core group of our players that have been here since December 2022. Tonight when I go there, and they say that whole training was a complete shock to us in terms of how hard it was, in terms of how detailed it was, but they adjusted very, very quickly. They adapted very, very quickly, and ultimately that's what they expect now. And the way I go about it is we've got 2 training sessions. If we're playing in season, we've got 2 trains. Tuesday's got to be bloody hard. It's got to be bloody hard because we don't have a Monday where you can have a little bit. If you're at a Quins or a Newcastle, whatever. Okay, you might be doing walkthroughs, a bit of detail here. Tuesday will be hard, but you'll have a double session. You'll have recovery. You'll have a Thursday session as well. On a typical week, we don't have that time, right? Thursday's going to be hard in parts, but I've got to keep you fresh, guys. And I'll come back to that. So Tuesday's going to be hard, and they love it, and it's part of our DNA that they just. And I know many teams say this, but in my view, we do it because we do it every week. We'll be out scrummaging sometimes at 9 o'clock at night because that's what's needed, and the boys love it and they enjoy it because what happens is that transfers onto the field. The other side of it is it's got to be Tuesday, yes, because it's the early part of the week. But this is the interesting thing is. You come in on a Thursday, you've had a brilliant win on a Saturday, you've had a brilliant training on the Tuesday, you got your information across to them because there's got to be a lot of interface during the day and clips shown while they're at work and things like that and feedback because obviously they're part-time. But you come in on a Thursday and you're energized for it and you turn up and there's a lot of yawns going on, right? So this is the massive disadvantage you've got. There's a lot of yawns. Well, guys have just done 4 full days at work. They've trained their nuts off on a Tuesday, probably not got home till 9:30, 10 o'clock, depending how far they live, maybe longer. The adrenaline's still going, so they're not getting to sleep early, some of them. I'll give you a case scenario. They've got to be up for 6:30 the next day at work. They're not sleeping in till 10 on a day off, all right, or getting a massage or going to the swimming pool or getting a stretch or whatever it is. Right, they've got another day's work. Then hopefully Wednesday they sleep okay. I'm just talking about the recovery process. Thursday's another full day, and as we know, when you work in a normal job, shall I say, on Thursday, that's the toughest day, isn't it? You're breaking the back Wednesday, but Thursday, oh my god, that's tough. And then they've got to train hard Thursday, not as hard as on Tuesday, but they've still got to train hard because we can't decondition. We cannot decondition. And then they've got to go into work on a Friday, and I'm there. My job's full time there. But, all my life being a full-time environment, I've just got to be aware, well, what's their day been like? And so, whereas in a full-time environment, you're going to see the players during the day and you're going to say, I'm talking, forget about rugby. How are things? Because as a DOR, you've got to know the person, right? You've got to know the person to improve that person first or to help that person, support that person. Whereas with them, what's in their life is probably girlfriend, family, whatever, rugby, right? Most of the time. I'm not saying there's not other stuff, right? Whereas these guys have also got a job, financial worries as well, because we don't pay anything for people to be full time. Even a highest paid player can manage a year or a season surviving on that. They get paid match fees, which is important, and that's a big driver as well. Can I say is wanting to be starting and not on the bench because they get more for a start. That's a big driver. I'm not sure how long you can go with that, to be perfectly honest, but that's just our model, and that's the way that we're sustainable. But there's so many other factors to factor in to making sure the guys that perform on an individual basis, and also having the time to connect with them away from the ground, because these guys will turn up at 5. You'll be with your coaches planning the meeting, planning the session. You might be able to catch up with 2 or 3 of them properly. After training, maybe 1. As I said, sometimes training goes on late, okay, because it's needed to. After training, maybe 1. And then it's like, well, what about the other 30 guys? So you've got to make time for them and at the right time as well. See how things are on all fronts. And, It's a great job. It's a great job. It does make it hard that you're not seeing them every single day face to face. But that's the model we've got. But it throws up plenty of challenges.
Yeah, which actually leads me on into the last segment because I had five quick fire questions, but I'm going to adapt a bit here, be flexible, and like the first question I would have for you is, what's the one negotiable standard you had as a player in your career that you bring to your current club that you will never ever drop?
Be coachable.
Coachable.
You turn up, be coachable. The interesting thing is, and this is probably a different podcast, but people always talk about no talent. You've got to turn up with energy, turn up with, the ability to work hard and all this sort of stuff. That's actually quite difficult. If you actually think about it, that's actually, you say turn up with energy and the no talent stuff, turn up to be coachable. But actually, what has been going on in that morning? What has been going on with that guy the night before? Some days, 100%, you're fully behind it. Other days, you actually have to get yourself into a mental spot to be able to do that. It's not a case of, all right, this requires no talent. Well, actually, it does require talent to do that, because if you're able to do that more often than not, that's a talent, that's an ability, isn't it? Right.
Yeah.
But I'd say be coachable, because if you're coachable, you will improve in some form. Things will get better for you for that day.
And does that apply to you as well as a coach? A coach is coachable as a leader.
100%.
Yeah.
No, 100%. And we'll have a meeting. So I'll get down the club after this, and I'll have a meeting with the S&C, the other coaches, the manager, and all that sort of stuff. Put everything on the table. Put everything on the table. Any gripes, big boys room, we call it, big boys room. Put everything on the table. You can call me a see you next Tuesday. I can call you that. But we know in 10, 15 minutes time, we're having a laugh. We're setting up for what's going on later, because that's the environment I've created. And I don't want anyone holding anything back or whispering in corridors or hiding anything. And say it. You got an issue, you bring it. But we're all here for the same purpose, and that's huge, And you've got to give them purpose, and we have done that down there. But that will help you be coachable, because you're not going to be coachable if you're hiding things. Even if you don't agree with how training is going or selection or whatever it is, it's like, if you're hiding that and you're not able to open up and say what you think, it's very, very difficult, right, to be able to absorb anything that's going to be thrown your way on that day.
What's the one quality of a person that you can see that they're immediately coachable or they're not immediately coachable?
Whether they make excuses early, I think.
Yeah. Could you spot that before you recruit them, though, Nick?
Yes, you do. You do as much. You never get it all right. 100%. I'm big on the character stuff and recruitment. Big on the character, and that's another thing, isn't it? Of course, Liam, is we all know the players out there at the elite level. We can all see them at the elite level and contact who we need to contact at the elite level. You're recruiting, it's better now we're in a champ, obviously, but you really have to do your homework in terms of potential with players that aren't obviously current champ players or prem players dropping down, or if they're the other side of the world but they've got English qualifications or whatever like that. You've got to do your homework, but you've got to do your homework on character 100%. And some guys, I like the challenge. Are they difficult? Because I'm not saying I was the easiest person to coach, right? I wasn't difficult for being difficult's sake. I would challenge because I wanted us to do things as well as possible, or thought this might be in a different direction to go, right? But again, we'd all buy into whatever was decided. There's guys at the club that have bought into our culture and what we do, and people have warned me off them. And I say, well, if they're malleable and adaptable enough, all right, that's a challenge, and I take that as a personal challenge. As the director of the ship, if you like, that is a bit of a challenge. It might be a bit of an ego thing as well. Slap me on the wrist or whatever. But you've got to enjoy challenges. It's like, well, this player, I can see a lot in them. They could be bloody good if they get it right. 90% of the time, if not 100% of the time, attitudinally wise, is some of those guys. I'm like, is there movement? Is there movement in their sort of character flaws? If there is, because I want them to be themselves. But while you're with us, as I say, you're coachable. You've got the right attitude to improve. But I still want you to challenge. So that's not a case of I don't want you to challenge. Because the other thing I don't like is yes men. Oh, I can't stand it. I can't. Yeah, nodding away. And I say about stop nodding at me. Right? Do you understand it, or have you got something for me that you don't agree with? Yeah. Yeah.
You lost them when they're yes men. But like my point is, on the uncoachable, some of those uncoachable people are the most talented, and if you can harness them, they become superstars.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so
Exactly.
many. Sometimes the question is why they're uncoachable. Is it them, or is it the coach just coaching them?
Yeah, and look, and you don't treat anyone. I learned this very, very early on. There's no way you can treat everyone equally. That
Yeah,
is bullshit. That is bullshit, right?
yeah,
That's absolutely. But you won't get. I just don't think you get anywhere doing that, right? He's late for training because of this reason or whatever it might be. He's going to get fined this or whatever the consequences are, and then someone else is exactly the same. Now you try and have a code of conduct where things are consistent, of course, because otherwise you'll lose everyone if they're not. But you have to understand context, situation, and also, I mean, Alex Ferguson said it about Cansard, didn't
yeah. I
he?
was thinking
there's,
about
fam-
Cantona.
there's
Yeah,
there's famous stories, isn't there? I mean, there was
yeah.
that one thing, that classic line when he did the kung fu kick. Was it the kung fu kick in at
Crystal
Yeah.
Selhurst
Palace.
Park?
Yeah,
And they lost the game or they drew the game or whatever, and he was bollocking the entire team. Eric, son, you can't go around doing that anyway. I just thought, and they asked him, so he goes, "You've got to treat him differently. If you want to get the best out of them, you've got to treat them differently."
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
as I come back to, rugby, those if you got a maverick that won't put his head in the spokes, you get found out, chewed up, spat out very quickly. And
yeah.
I come back to being tough and intelligent. If you're tough and intelligent, okay, and I say you've got to be a team player as well. Everything for the best of the team, then you won't go far wrong, and we can work with that. But yeah, 100%. Those guys are the best challenges, Liam. I find
Yeah,
them the best challenges, the most intriguing. The psychology for me is massive. It's
yeah,
huge.
yeah.
Love the psychology side of it, and you'll speak with those guys a lot more just to get to the bottom of things and to keep them coachable and motivated to do the right thing.
And sometimes, I mean, obviously, I'm speaking from a business side, that sometimes the leaders say people are uncoachable, but what they're really trying to say is that they don't fit into their type of persona or character that they want. And this is like a big issue. I deal with a lot of law firms, and when they're hiring, they're looking for other leaders that are clones of themselves. And then you think all the most talented people, and I'm speaking about legal law firms here, the most talented junior lawyers, most of them will leave because they'll question the leadership and push back, and they'll say they're not coachable or they're making life a bit uncomfortable. But these are the most talented people within their organizations, but they're discounted. And it's so important to, as a leader, to see that. And yeah,
Because they part of their talent is because that they understand it a lot better, or they might see a more modern way of doing things, or whatever it might be, or a different way of doing things, and you have to embrace that. You
yeah,
have to embrace that to get the best out of that person, but also the collective.
yeah,
It can't be your way or the highway. Yes, you've got to give direction. There has to be accountability, but the other big thing is empowerment and empowering these guys to achieve and to be leaders amongst themselves. Last year we had a captain, Liam, and I'm a big proponent. If I want my ideal captain is a member of the back five, because you're closest to the breakdown, where that's always the decisions in it. The breakdown's always the one where you might win a few close calls or lose a few close calls. Close to the breakdown, it's where all the chaos is. You're also likely to play 80 minutes. You make a hooker captain, he's going to get subbed off after 50 when the critical decisions are going to be made. You make a back captain, you're a bit too far away. Number 9, just about, but I don't really know the intricacies. Anyway, last year I made our scrum half captain because he was probably the best captain, but he wasn't captain all the time. He wasn't in the side just because he was captain. He was the best 9 at the start of the year. But the other 9 sort of challenged him, played better than him for some weeks, and he would play. And so there was about 6 other guys that captained the side, and you could see they enjoyed and they grew. Yeah, there was a bit of trepidation with this responsibility. Now, look, yes, they have got their jobs and all that, which are probably a little bit more important in certain ways, but their passion, their love is rugby. And these guys actually still, a lot of them pine for full-time contracts anyway. So they want to do the very, very best they do. But I think you give that empowerment and responsibility to them over time, that they will thrive, and then everything becomes sort of looks after itself a little bit more from that point of view.
yeah. Excellent point. Right. Last few questions, Nick. Just taking up a lot of your time. Very grateful for it. One word, well, you can have 5, 6 words if you want. The best leader you played under and why?
Best leader, I would say Andre Voss. Andre Voss at Harlequins. He was my captain first 2 years. I mean, the guy is just full of integrity, to be perfectly honest. He led from the front. I mean, the guy was brave as a lion for a start. He was highly consistent in his performance, never pulled back in training, would give everything in training, spoke well, but cared about his players, really cared about the players. There wasn't a corrupt bone in his body. And I don't mean bad corruption, I mean little corruption, like he might have a Mars bar or whatever and say he's having a banana or whatever it might be. I mean, he was just integrity personified, but he led by example. He was a quality player, obviously ex-South African captain, but he was exemplary.
Okay, and what's the hardest phone call you've ever had to make as a coach?
I mean, I remember when we won the league, actually, because obviously I'm making more phone calls in my role now, but when we won the league, I had to drop a player for that the deciding game, the game that would have won the league for us if we had won it, which we did. And this player who had been playing probably 70% of the games in his position, and I dropped him for this one. I think it was it was more from a defensive point of view, and I felt terrible, but I knew that you've just got to trust your gut. You've just got to trust your gut. You've got to go with it. I've seen too many times I've seen coaches go with the status quo or go with a senior player, whatever it is, and it's the wrong call. And it backfires for a whole host of reasons that things start to unravel, not just for that game. And I was like, no, I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen when it's worked well and when it hasn't worked well. You've got to do things. Ultimately, when you're making those decisions, you've got to do it your way. So if you do, you fall on the sword yourself, not because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings or whatever like that. Because sadly, you have to make tough calls, whether it's cutting contracts or whatever. Anyway, he played about 70% of the games. It was a tough phone call. Resolved maybe 2 weeks afterwards, properly face to face. He wouldn't want to talk to me or whatever, or kept his distance at the club. We won the game 52-0. So I think I probably could have got away with keeping him in the side there because I thought it was going to be a lot tighter with the game. But yeah, look, those are never nice phone calls to have, but you've got to have them.
Yeah,
you've got to have them, and you just got to be honest with them. You just got to be honest. I've been in sides where the DORs, they said, "Why not in the side?" I could tell you names, but I don't want to get them in trouble. But I could tell you names, and he goes, just mimes tossing a coin. It was a toss of a coin.
We've heard that before.
And walks off.
Yeah.
Walks off. Why aren't I playing? Is that all you got for me? You're not even talking to me.
Yeah, a couple of people have said that to us.
Yeah.
What one habit from elite sport every boardroom should steal tomorrow?
Coachable, open, adaptable, whatever it might be, and developing accountability for people. I think if you've got the right people, if you've recruited the right people, and you're positioning them right, I think everyone enjoys accountability, being responsible for something. As long as obviously they love doing it. Everyone has and is responsible for a task or for delivering. I think it's important, giving them a purpose. I think if there's people around the workplace or whatever that don't understand their purpose or aren't committed to their purpose, that's when you've sort of got to nip it in the bud or find another way or find someone else, because it works from the top down and the bottom up.
Yeah, you made a really important point as well about recruiting the right people or having the right people in the team, because this is what we say, which is basically with sport, if you make the wrong decisions, is obvious immediately with the result on a Saturday or over a period. In business, it takes longer. So recruitment is so important. So honest answer to this one, which I'm sure you'll give me. 12 years at the Stoop, who had the worst banter in the changing rooms?
There's quite a few, but that's an easy one. That's Nobson, we'd call him. Awful. And the thing is, I think he actually thought most of the time it was good, and people would no one would ever laugh. They would ignore him after anything, but he would just laugh to himself all the time. He also had one of the very, very best, well, two things actually about him. There's one of the best, falls or stacking you could see, like George Robson, Toulon. That's all you've got to do when he's captain. He captains us for a European game against Toulon, and he falls straight on his arse coming out of the change room. And when everyone's clapping, the subs are all cheering you on, energising you coming out. and he falls straight on his arse. And he's there for a good sort of like 10, 20 seconds before he's realised what's happening. So that obviously went down brilliantly amongst the group for a long, long time, got milked. He's also got, and we know rugby, right, and sport, there's some pretty good nicknames. There's some pretty good nicknames out there. And I think one of the best ones is the nickname we have for him, which was Saggy Cocknose. If you have a look at him, front on face profile, Saggy Cocknose is pretty apt. You didn't like.
That's great. Good point. Good way to finish your podcast.
Nick, that was brilliant, especially the nickname, but honest, specific, and straight from the inside. Moments most people only ever read about from the outside, if they get to read about it. But we could have gone on for so much longer, and we're very, very grateful for your time there. There was so much gold within it. The rugby stories, what you're doing in coaching, your methodology, and so much that leaders can take from that. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the Business End. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.